All right, welcome back, kiddos. Now we are moving on to midpoint formulas, and this is actually incorrect. It is not 1.2, it is 1.3, so make sure we check that. All right, so let's talk about this. What if I asked you, what's the number that's the middle of 10 and 20? Okay, so think about that. All right, what's the numbers between 30 and 40? All right, what numbers between 76 and 120? All right, so pause the video and see if you can answer these three. All right, so hopefully you said 10 and 20, that is 25, right? Not 25, right? That would be 15, right? 10 and 20 would be 15. 30 and 40 would be 35. But what about 76 and 120? All right, that's a little bit more difficult, right? You might have said 98, but how do we get that? Well, the easy way is we use what's called the midpoint formula, right? So we just add the two numbers and we divide by 2. So the midpoint is actually just like finding the average of two numbers. Okay, so for 10 and 20, you would have said 10 plus 20 divided by 2, which is 30 divided by 2, which is 15, right? And that would, you would have said 70 divided by 2, right? So that's how you would do that. You say 76 plus 120 divided by 2. So for any two numbers, we just divide them by 2 after we add them up. Okay, so if that's on one number, now we're going to talk about what's called the midpoint formula. What the midpoint formula tells us is we're going to use that to find the middle of a segment. Okay, so the middle of a segment is called the midpoint, okay, as you might think. So it's that middle point in between two other points. So here's how we're going to do it. We are going to first calculate the middle of the x term. Okay, so to calculate the middle of the x term, we're going to say the x value is equal to this right over here. We're going to add the two x's, x1 plus x2, and we're going to divide it by 2. Right? So we're going to calculate the middle of the x term separately. Okay, so the common mistake is people try to type this whole thing into the calculator. You cannot type the whole thing into the calculator. So second step is we need to calculate the middle of the y terms. Okay, so to do that, we're going to say the y value is the y plus the y divided by 2. Okay, so the critical thing is we cannot just type this. Okay, we cannot just type this into the calculator. Okay, we have to use these formulas. All right, so keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and do it. So it says find the midpoint of the segment, right? So this is the middle of the segment. It's called the midpoint with the following two endpoints. All right, so let's go ahead and first just, we're going to say that's the first point. That's the second point. So it's x1, y1, and x2, y2, right? So that's the critical thing, is that we have to remember that x comes first and then y comes second, right? And now let's go ahead and do our values, right? We said the first thing we're going to do is calculate the x value. All right, so the x value is going to be adding the two x's and dividing by 2. So if the x's are the first value, we're going to say 9 plus 5 divided by 2, right? And we're going to just type that into the calculator just like we see it, right? 9 plus 5 divided by 2, which will give us 7, right? So then the second value, we're going to push the y values in, right? So we're going to put negative 6 plus 4 divided by 2. Negative 6 plus 4 divided by 2, right? Now I make sure that I use the alpha y equals enter button or use the division button first. We're going to push that division button first, then we're going to see that, right? So negative 6 plus 4 divided by 2, right? That's going to be equal to negative 1, right? So then the third step is we are going to, I forgot that earlier. The third step is we are going to write as a point. Okay, so that write it as a point, which means as an x comma y. All right, so we have 3 steps. First one, calculate the y, x. Second, calculate the y. Third one, put them into the point. So 7 and -1, we're going to say is our point. 7 comma -1. And that's going to be our answer. All right, so that's all we have to do is we need to find the middle of the x's, the middle of the y's, and then we put it in there. So a common mistake is to try to type that whole thing into Desmos or to Delta Math, and you can't do it like that. All right, so keeping that in mind, see if you can get this next one on your own. All right, so if we said that's our x1, that's our y1, that's our x2, y2, okay? And we're going to say the first thing is we're going to calculate the x's, right? So I'm going to say -5 plus -8 divided by 2. Okay, if we type that into our calculator, it's actually -6.5. All right, y value. Okay, we're going to type in alpha y equals n, or -4 plus 3 over 2, which is equal to -0.5. All right, so then our point is going to be -6.5 comma -0.5. Okay, of course you could have put -13 over 2 and -1/2, right? That could have been answers as well. All right, either one of those would be acceptable answers. All right, so that's the main thing, is that we need to type that into the calculator just like that, and then it'll give us those answers. Okay. All right, next, point M is the midpoint of VW. Find the length of VM. Okay, so if M is the midpoint, and we want to find the length of VM, let's think about that. If we want to find VM, VM is represented by 4x minus 1, right? VM is 4x minus 1, right? So if we want to find the length of VM, we need to first figure out the value of x. Then we're going to multiply it times 4, right? And then we're going to subtract 1 from it. Well, what do we know? If that's the middle, so if that's the midpoint, then we know one part equals the other part, right? We know that this part equals this part if this is the middle, right? That means they have to equal the same. So that's how we set up our equation. So that's what we need to make sure is how to set it up correctly. So we're just going to do that. 4x minus 1 equals 3x plus 3. All right, so now we know the first step is going to be the variable, right, that we're going to move. So we're going to -3x, right? Cancels out, gives us 1x minus 1 equals +3, right? The second one, we are going to do the constant, right? So we're going to add 1 and add 1. So that means 1x equals 4. So x equals 4, right? So if x equals 4, that means VM equals 4 times x minus 1 equals 4 times 4 minus 1, right? Equals 15 if we type that into our calculator. All right, so that's what we need to do, is just troubleshoot. If we know that's the problem solve, if we know that's the middle, then we have to recognize that's how we set up our equation, and then we can solve and then substitute. Okay, so let's keep it moving, right? What about the midpoint of AB? Okay, so this is a DCP style question. All right, so you're going to remember this one for our DCP. Okay, the midpoint, the first step we're going to do is label points. Okay, so if we see that, if that's A, if this is 0, right, that's going to be -4, 2. -4, 2, right? If this is B, then we're going to say that's 2, -2, right? 2, -2, right? Then the second step we're going to use is the midpoint formula. Right? Now that we have our points, then we're going to do that, right? That's going to be a lot easier than trying to figure out what it is. Now, on this one, we have a different way of doing it. We might think that this is the middle, right? We might think that that looks like the middle, but we want to be able to confirm it. So this is how we're going to do it. So we're going to say the x is going to be equal to -4 plus 2, right, divided by 2, which gives us -1, right? And then we're going to say the y values are 2, right, plus -2, 2 plus -2 divided by 2, which is going to be 0, right? And this is negative 1 comma 0, so that it is our correct answer, negative 1 comma 0. Okay, so on our DCP, we're going to first label our points. Then we're going to use the midpoint formula. All right, keeping it moving. That's the main thing that we need to know. So let's go ahead and apply that into some knowledge that we talked about last time and to the next level. All right, so it says find the location of the center of the circle, the midpoint. We're going to use the midpoint formula. So the first thing we're going to do is find the x's, right? Middle of the x's. So we're going to say 3 plus 7 divided by 2, which gives us 5, right? The y's, right? We're going to say 2 plus negative 4 divided by 2, which gives us negative 1, right? So that would mean our center is 5 comma negative 1, right? The distance, let's just go ahead and write out what it would be, right? Let's say the distance would be, in this formula, right, we would say if that's our first point, right, we would say x1, y1. That's our second point, x2, y2. We would say 3 minus 7, close it squared, plus 2 minus negative 4, close it squared. All right. That's it. All right, let's keep it moving. All right, next, the midpoint of AB is M is negative 7 comma 4. If the coordinates of A are negative 6 comma 7, what are the coordinates of B? All right, so this one is different. This was given end and mid point, find other end. So given one end and the midpoint, find the other end. Okay, so it says the midpoint is this. If A, we know that A, endpoint of AB, right? It has to be the endpoint of AB, right? So if that's the end, here they want B, which is the other end. Okay, so not finding the midpoint, not finding the midpoint. They already gave us the midpoint, right? So that's what we need to recognize. We want to find that. So here's how we do it. First step, we're going to think end, middle, and then end. Okay, so the end point, we're going to think, it says end point, one of them is negative 6.7, negative 6 comma 7, negative 6 comma 7. The middle is negative 7 comma 4, negative 7 comma 4. Right? The other end is right over here. So if that's the end and that's the middle, then we just need to go that same direction. So on this one, we are doing what? We are subtracting 1, right? We're subtracting 1. So we're going to go to the next pattern. That's going to be negative 8, right? And then from here, we know we are subtracting, right? So what we would do to find out what we were subtracting was we would say 7 minus 4, and that is 3, right? So that tells us that we need to subtract 3. So if I subtract 3 to go from here to here, 4 minus 3 would give me 1, right? So that's how we do our rule. I figure out the pattern here, and then I figure out the pattern here. So we are basically follow the pattern. Okay, so that's the key on this one. If they give us the end and the midpoint, so we don't want to get tricked on that one. So on this one, they want us to find the midpoint, right? On this one, they give us the midpoint. So that's the difference. All right, let's keep it moving. So on this one, this is also a DCP type question. I'm going to show us a test taking strategy. It says if point K is the midpoint, okay, point K is the middle of JL, what are the coordinates of J? J has to be of the endpoint, right? So if that's the middle, we can't think that J is over here, right? If that's the middle, that means J has to be up here, somewhere, right? So if J is up there, let's go and look at these. So F says 6 comma negative 5. 6, negative 5. That would be down there, right? That can't be correct. G would say negative 6 comma 7. Negative 6 comma 7. That might be right. Okay, what about H? H is 0, 1. 0, 1. No, that's wrong. And then what about J? Negative 4 comma 5. Negative 4 comma 5 would be right here. Does that make sense if that's the middle? No. So it has to be that one right there. G has to be the correct answer. All right, and one other way we can check is like this. I'm going to make a pattern. If it goes that way, I'm going to use my slope triangle to use that same pattern. So let's do that. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Then this is 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do that same pattern. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And so that point is negative 6 comma 7. Negative 6 comma 7. All right, so was our answer. All right, next. Now we got to our final problem. All right, so this is the toughest one. All right, so it says finding the length of a segment. Point M is the midpoint of PQ. Find PM, MQ, and PQ. So this is putting it all together. I want you to do this one on your own. First thing, set up the part equals that. So we're going to say part equals part. 5x minus 3 equals 11 minus 2x. Okay, so to find each of these, we know if that's that, we got to figure out what x is, right? So let's do that. All right, so first step, we're going to move so add 2x, right? 7x minus 3 equals 11 cancels, right? We're going to add 3 for our second step, right? Add 3. If we do that, then we have 7x, those cancel, equals 14, right? Last step, divide by both sides by 7, right? So x equals 2. But we are not going to forget that we have to substitute back in, right? So step number 3, we have to substitute our final, step number 3, right? 4, 2. Step number 3 was divide, right? So PM equals 5x minus 3, right? 5x minus 3, which equals 5 times 2 minus 3, which is equal to 7. Okay? MQ. If this is 7 and this is the middle, how much do we expect that to be? We should also expect it to be 7, right? So let's check that. 11 minus 2x equals 11 minus 2 times 2, which is 7. All right, and then what about PQ? How much would we expect that to be? Well, we should expect it to be 7 plus 7, right? We should expect it to be 14, right? So let's check. So that's going to be 5x minus 2x, which is 3x, right? Negative 11 plus negative 3 plus 11 is 8, equals 3 times 2 plus 8, right? Which is equal to 14. So that is our correct answer. All right, so if you do have any questions on that, just let me know, or rewatch whatever portion you need. So on this one, to find the segment length, we need to figure out what x is. Well, to do that, we need to figure out what our equation is. It's not plus part equals part plus part equals whole. This one, if that's the midpoint, means part equals part. So we have to set up the equation that way. Once we set it up a certain way, then we know once we solve it, we can substitute. So the toughest thing is thinking, how do we set it up? Part equals part, or part plus part equals whole.